just to introduce Katrin.
Please.
That
was quick.
So, Katrin grew up in southwest Germany, and she moved to the U.S. in the San Francisco Bay Area in 2014.
That's right.
So she came to the U.S. for a job and in search of adventure, and she found both and decided to stay, which is great. She said that before she fell in love with kayaking, she spent over 10 years rock climbing. First in Europe and then later in the U.S. When she moved here. So as way back, many of you may remember Katrin, one of her first posts with Basque was about a lost coast paddle.
Oh yeah.
She's an avid cyclist and she loves hiking and bike packing as well. But she, on her bike adventures, she biked from Mexico City to Oaxaca. And has also biked in the highlands of Guatemala, Southern California deserts, Death Valley, a few more. So she started kayaking around 2017, first in whitewater. No surprise there, obviously an adventurous person, in the rivers of California, but she is somebody who prefers endurance sports, so she switched to sea kayaking. And before her first big Inside Passage trip that you'll hear about today, she had done some shorter 1 to 2 week kayaking expeditions with friends, places like Glacier Bay, the Hornstrandir Reserve in Iceland. So she went big. Channel Islands and a few solo trips locally, like on the Lost Coast. One of the first posts I started to say that I remembered seeing from her was she kayaked the Lost Coast solo, I think, and when she got, of course, if any of you know the Lost Coast, you can't get there from here. And so she kayaked it one way, picked up her bike and rode back the other way. And when I read that, I thought, man, what a badass. So I think Katrin is a true adventurer. She loves putting together adventures. She likes to avoid driving and prefers to kind of try to combine her adventures with biking and kayaking and things like that. So she's going to tell us about a solo kayak trip up the Inside Passage.
Thank you. I feel you should do the talk because that's And okay, first of all, who can hear me loud and clear? Yep. Most people and the others? Should I speak louder? Yeah. Is that better? Yeah. Awesome. Cool. Second, I love the fact that we're doing the stretching exercise. I would love to show you my favorite, but I'm so wired up we have to do this after. It's like a little bit involved, but I love the stretching. Cool. Okay, I'm going to talk about Inside Passage kayaking. I think a lot of you have probably heard about that trip. Who hasn't heard that term Inside Passage ever? Okay, cool. One person? Okay. Well, we'll look at the map. So the Inside Passage runs from, not technically Orcas Island, but down here, San Juan Islands, just Washington, runs all the way up to Alaska, Skagway. So this is the Inside Passage. I did Orcas Island because I have friends there, so I could just drive there and leave my car. Makes it pretty easy. In my case, it summed up to 1,176 miles. Yeah, I had 2 border crossings. That's always exciting to cross a border on a kayak. From here to here, I spent 52 days total and 44 days kayaking. And the most amazing thing about this thing is you can just go back by ferry. You literally arrive at your destination, you jump on a ferry, you spend another, I think, 3.5 days and come back. Isn't that amazing, right? For someone who doesn't like driving or flying or all these things, perfect. And I started that as a solo trip very intentionally, and I ended up meeting a bunch of people, and I kayaked the last about 3 weeks with someone. So that's the mini summary. Why did I do that? I did shorter expeditions, but I had this dream of like, what is a solo expedition? What does it even mean? What does solo mean? What does a long expedition mean? All that planning and all that stuff. So it's been in my head for a while. And then why the Inside Passage? I mean, the coastline is just beautiful. Everything you see on pictures, it's just pretty amazing. And it has all these remote stretches while at the same time, it's probably one of the most simple, in terms of logistics, expeditions you can do, right? So it's an expedition supported by public transit. Like, think about that another time, right? Like, you don't have to fly. Yeah, you have to get to the beginning, but you can take a ferry back. You don't have to ship your kayak somewhere complicated. You don't even rent a kayak. It's very simple. And you can resupply every 100 to 200 miles in towns. Right, so that's also very different from some other larger expeditions where people have to fly some food out and get it dropped by drones and whatever complicated stuff. Pretty simple. And also for what an expedition goes, I would say it's relatively easy kayaking. Right, it's not California coast sea kayaking. There are some open stretches, but a lot of stretches are pretty protected. You still have weather and everything, but that all made for like a good package of like, okay, I think this should be my first big solo expedition. And I'm just going to show this briefly because that kind of shows how it breaks into these legs, right? Like I'm not going to read all of that, but just as an example, this is basically from Prince Rupert. How does this work? Prince Rupert here, going to Kayaking. It's 114 miles. You can spend however long you want to spend on that. But basically, once you get to Kayaking, you can restock, you can sleep in a hotel, you can take a shower, you can talk to people. And so this goes over and over again. So basically, in your head, you can break down this huge thing into all these many little legs, right? And that's really like, it's just 8 vacations, concatenated, sort of. Yeah. And, well, obviously, I'm not the first one who's doing this. This pretty rad lady has done that in the 30s. Think about that, in a canoe, in a wooden canoe. Her canoe is, by the way, up in Anacortes in the museum. And she did this in a flannel shirt and maybe some wool pullover and a short and certainly not a GPS and all these things. She did this solo in 1937. Wow. So it's very, very, very impressive. I think in 2023, when I did that last year, maybe about 10 people did the whole stretch. It's a little bit hard to know, but I feel in some ways people are connected. So that's about the number. It's not no one does it, but it's also not a ton of, like, when you think of maybe Lofoten, I think many more people do that every year. It's pretty well documented. I'm going to start with a bunch of photos to keep you going on that, and then I'll talk a little bit while showing the photos, but then I'll later get into more of the logistics. How did I plan? All the things. I'm going to look at my phone so I don't spend forever here. And for me, thinking about the legs was really important because otherwise you just stand in front of this huge thing. So I did a lot of planning to break down every leg. And I started in a heat wave. This was literally my first day. That was my first overnighter. It started that beautiful, and I feel it stayed that beautiful. It was so hot. I think this picture is taken at like 9 p.m. or something, right? It's like hot. I'm like in t-shirts. It's just getting super warm. I have this beautiful sunset. And then at some point I get a little bit further out. And it just started immediately beautiful. Like it took 5 minutes to be that beautiful. And you'll see that a couple of the pictures, basically for the first half of the pictures that I'm showing, you won't see anyone else because that was literally very, very remote already. Even though I was near towns, especially here from Powell River to Port Hardy here, there are a bunch of little towns. There's Port Mitchell, I think Telegraph Cove is here, Campbell River. But by wiggling through all these little channels, I pretty much avoided everything. And I think specifically on that leg, I just didn't see anyone. I think I met one kayaker somewhere briefly. And there was this amazing feeling already of being solo in a very remote area. The nice thing on this first 2 weeks about it, there were emergency exits, right? I could have easily, within a day, got to like a town if anything would go wrong. So it was actually pretty neat to get this already a sense for remoteness, but still, if something goes wrong. And practice all my camping, got flooded and all these things, and learn what not to do. So I was just wandering through that, seeing how I feel. Also feel being alone that much, because afterwards the stretches that were coming, they're more committing. And so then this is when you hit Port Hardy. For those of you who are familiar with Vancouver Island, this is Vancouver Island, and so this is the northernmost part of Vancouver Island. And this stretch is getting more real because this is probably the most exposed part of the whole trip. It's called Cape Caution. And when you read books about the Inside Passage, everyone talks about that. Everyone's like, yeah, this is the big deal. The crossing here because it's kind of long and the winds really come in. And also then this cape. I deviated from the original Inside Passage, which would go here. And I decided to go more outside. Because at that point, all my system worked. Yeah.
Is Skagway here? It's also called the Queen Shrine.
Oh, maybe not quite as far, but yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Okay, I thought it was closer to the top of Vancouver Island.
Yeah, no, it's further north. Yeah.
Okay.
So yeah, at this point, I had dialed in all my systems, which was actually a good thing to have 2 weeks of like a good start, and then to know when you get here, what you can do, what the distances are, that everything works well, that you're comfortable with, the weather and whatnot. And so I decided to go out there, mostly because I'm still afraid of grizzly bears. And all this here is really prime grizzly bear country. So by going further out, you trade with wolves, you get wolves, and I'm way more happy about wolves than about grizzly bears. And also it's more beautiful, or at least for me, it's just more remote. You got a little bit more sea going, and you got more sandy beaches. And that's when I started to really not see anyone. Because before I would still see maybe a sailboat come by. But then there's this things where like for days I was just, I haven't seen a face. I haven't even seen a face in the distance.
So you were doing about 30 miles a day, give or take?
I think my average, if you don't count in rest days, were 26 miles.
Yeah, those are kind of long days for camping and packing. So we're on the water.
Very fast in packing.
Yeah.
Very fast in packing.
Yes, I believe it.
Yeah. So it gets all more rugged and rough. The camping was superb. I mean, imagine you're landing on this beach. All you see is wolf prints. No people, just a sandy beach for yourself. This is one too early. Where's Mike? Mike, what do you think this is?
Campania.
Oh, okay. This should be actually in the next section, but yeah, this is Campania. One of the most beautiful. And Mike says you can hike all the way to the top, but when you do want to do 26 miles a day, you can't actually also hike to the top. There were a few days when I had to start really early to ditch some weather. And here, this is the longest stretch. And also this is a stretch if anyone wants to do just one section of it and is willing to get a little bit more outside, so a little bit more adventure. But this is by far, I think, the most beautiful stretch between Shearwater and Bella Bella down there and Prince Rupert up here. And the Inside Passage, again, goes like this in this channel. And then here, this is the original Inside Passage. Again, you have to deal with way more grizzly bears, potentially. Well, I mean, this can be a terrible wind channel, but in general, you don't have big seas there, right? And I chose, I'm not quite sure what this is called. This here would be the Outside Passage, and this is sort of the middle, which, gets you nicely in between. You definitely get more ocean swell, you get more weather, you get more sandy beaches, and hopefully less bears. That was really my motivation. It started weirdly social. So I came to Klemtu, this one place, and to Jonathan, everyone has the same tent. Like, thanks for this tip of buying this tent. It's not such a secret because really everyone has this tent. So there was a group of other kayakers, and we were invited to stay in front of the big house in Klemtu, and just really everyone has the same tent. It works really nicely. Then I came to one island. When you paddle up to an island, and then there's a stick with like a piece of underwear flying in the wind. So I get there and I'm like, what's going on here? So there's this Swiss guy sitting, and he's been stuck there for like 4 days due to the weather. And I think his wife was listening to the general weather forecast, and there were gale warnings every day. But it's the larger area, also including more towards Haida Gwaii. So his wife was, no, you can't paddle today. So she was at home and telling him on his InReach, no, you can't paddle today, there's gale warning. So he's been sitting there for 4 days, and when I came, he's like, wait, why are you paddling? I'm like, you just go early and whatnot. And he's like, oh, can I join you maybe the next day? Because I really need to leave here. So, but we had to leave at 3 a.m. or something that day because the weather was supposed to turn really bad at 10. So. And then finally I got my rain, because until then I had like a heat wave, it was sunny, I was actually getting sunburned, on my way to Alaska. And it just rained. I mean, I guess the way you would expect Alaska to be all the time anyways. I had that on day, 15 or something. a tarp, if anyone wants to do, and I think Daniel wants to do the inside part, a tarp is really essential, right? So you need to be able to put yourself somewhere away from your tent, and you want to sit under a tarp. My tarp is barely big enough to fit me, but still nice to have, but it fits in my kayak. And then the weather started to be like, not really bad, but also not really great. So every day at 10, I needed to be off the water because the wind got really strong. I had a southerly wind, but I didn't want to go south, but I wanted to go north. So that was kind of helpful, but the waves get really steep. So it's kind of like, imagine the Bay Area, if you're like behind Alcatraz and you have like a 20 knots wind and some current. And yeah, it gets a little bit interesting. So you don't necessarily need to be in there. Thunderstorms coming through, beautiful though, because again, there's no one. I think there was a sailboat coming by once in 7 days. That's pretty much it.
Campania again? it's the only island with sandy beaches, basically.
No, there are more sandy beaches, but this is such a beautiful stretch of island. Again, it's really hard to imagine that no one came to build a house, right? Oh. Yeah, I mean, in the Bay Area, if it wouldn't be protected, this would happen, right? So no one's there, no one's camping there, no one has built a house, no one has built anything. It's just you on the beach.
The whole island is some sort of national park.
I think so, yeah.
If you look it up online, they say,
yeah.
You need to get permission to land here.
Oh, well, I don't do that.
Nobody was waiting to arrest him.
Towards the end of that stretch, it was really foggy, and it got actually so foggy that I couldn't move for half a day because I had to cross what's then the inside passage leading into Prince Rupert. And I was literally stuck on this island. There's a deer. Like I was sitting on this island just waiting for the fog to dissipate, and the radio was always like, oh, fog's gonna dissipate in the late morning. I'm like, okay, I'll wait. Fog's gonna dissipate around noon. Okay. Fog's gonna dissipate early afternoon, and at some point I'm like, oh God, I'm just going now. Then I went halfway, and then I got stuck again, landing on this island. Prince Rupert is like 25 miles back there, and I just didn't dare to go. So it was always this like going and hopping and another little island to get stuck on. It's just beautiful places also to be stuck on, if I wouldn't be running low on food. But, this is like the sort of fog bank coming out of Prince Rupert, and you know that all well here in the Bay Area. We really have that. Have you ever kayaked through that fog band when it comes into, so exactly, that sort of thing. And then at the end, I re-met people that I've been meeting basically at the beginning of that stretch. They just randomly happened to be there at exactly after 10 days as I did. Jeff's a sailor. He sailed it basically in a very old sailboat, so it was really slow. And Joan is a kayaker who did basically the inside passage. So we all came to Prince Rupert, and there was a big party to like re-meet each other. And from there, everything changed because until then you have those are the first people you've seen basically on my slides because I haven't really met many. And as of then, it became a party, kind of an interesting shift. So we went together then with Joan and another one from here to Ketchikan, and all of a sudden it's back to summertime, right? We had like a Caribbean holiday basically. In between this is a stretch like around the border between Prince Rupert and Ketchikan. It was insane. It was insanely beautiful. Like for 3 days in a row, you just couldn't believe it. It was also very calm mostly, sometimes foggy. This is Jacob, the other person we've been kayaking with. So this is like 7 p.m., right? Kind of incredible. We made some marshmallows on the camping stove because at that point we had crossed into America. So, and then in Ketchikan, from there on, I continued with Jacob, the other person who was swimming, because he wanted to continue. He had lost his buddies who had to bail out from the trip for medical reasons for themselves. And so we continued together. Ketchikan's here. And then the next town is actually not so far. It's Wrangell, a little tiny town. And again, this started with a party. So there was a lot of weird social life that I didn't expect. So this is the tail end of the race to Alaska. So the race to Alaska, as Mike knows, is mostly fast sailboats that do it in 10 days, 12 days, or something really fast. But there's a ton of adventurers, like Mike, who do it in kayaks or rowboats, or they're like two dudes who bought like a Hobie kayak, like a thing where you can have paddles and has a sail and you can also sort of paddle. And so this is the tail end of people. And we happened to be in Ketchikan when they arrived, and that was amazing. we continued on a really bad day, but I really wanted to go. This was probably my fastest average speed I ever got. I think we made 18 miles in less than 3 hours until the weather turned so bad that there actually wasn't a question that we should just pull over. Luckily, with the GPS that I'm showing later, I can like very easily identify beaches, and it was let's just pull over. The moment we land, it starts raining. It's really the sky is opening. And Jacob did probably the only reasonable thing. He ran out, grabbed his tape, that's this one, a tarp, put it into the trees and started to collect firewood while it's still dry. So he was running around like a maniac, just collecting firewood. I was like, what's going on? He's like, hey, we're gonna sit here all day, might as well have a fire. So we had like the biggest pile of firewood and sat there for the next 24 hours making a fire, but not the worst place to sit out a storm. Kept being pretty rainy, and we came to Wrangell, and that was probably my most favorite campsite where we were allowed to camp on the dock. So basically well, at least that's what I thought, and we pitched the tents, because I had read it somewhere, we pitched the tents, we're like really exhausted. This is my longest paddle ever, 52 miles we did that day, just because we kind of wanted to.
You need to point out the neighboring boat that's
Oh, yeah.
Hokuleu.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh,
Oh, wow.
the two masts.
Yeah.
Two masts, yeah.
That's Hokuleu.
So we pitched the tents, we were there, we were super exhausted, and I was like, oh, I should call the harbor master. I called him on the radio. I was like, I heard it is fine for us to camp here, and he's like, no. I'm like, oh, but actually we can't move. Can we really not? And he's like, yeah, okay, whatever. So we ended up camping there. Pretty nice spot. And then this is the nice stretch going through glaciers and through what is known as Bear Island. This one here, I don't know if anyone has heard that name. Kuznuru is, I think, the original name. Yes. Admiralty Island today, which I might have not done this solo because I'm just really scared of grizzly bears. But because they say they have the highest concentration of grizzly bears. But so now, since I'm kayaking with Jacob, I'm like, okay, might as well do that.
You can outrun him, right?
But we had to stop over at LeConte Glacier first, which, obviously well, this is until about 10 miles before, and all of a sudden everything changed, right? So it's really green, and it was pretty warm still, and then all of a sudden you get closer. Yeah, and you have these icebergs swimming everywhere. It gets cold. The whole scenery changes. We got far-ish, I would say, a mile to the, the mouth, potentially. And then you can see that here with the paddle. We could have pushed further, but I don't know, it didn't seem necessary. But what was necessary was definitely having, like whiskey on the rocks, as you should when you're there. And then we had a few, oh my God, so hard days because spring tides, and we'll talk about that later, what that means. Here we landed after, I think 15 hours of kayaking. Insane, not even far, but it was just against everything, wind and currents, and I don't know why. This is low tide. Yeah. And we ended up sleeping in this forest. And that was very far. It was a very long drag. And the next morning we dragged it down again. So there were a few days where camping was just really, really hard. Usually it wasn't, but sometimes it was. And then finally we got to Kuznuru. I had, you need to book these things on like a reservation system. I got lucky to, find 2 days where it was free. So I booked it about 2 weeks ago. Earlier, but how do you know when exactly you'll be there, right? So one of the reasons we pushed so hard on these like hard camping stretches was that I'm like, but tomorrow I have this A-frame and I really want to stay in this A-frame. So we made it just in time, had a wonderful time in this A-frame, made quesadillas on the stove. That was just the most perfect rest day here. And also kind of nice to stay in an A-frame when you're on Bear Island, I thought. And then probably one of the highlights of this trip, yeah, look at you. So Juneau is up here. So this is the channel leading into Juneau. And this is Kuznuru that I showed earlier. So normally you would have to go back out and around. And this is about a mile. So someone built, like many years ago, a little railway track and a little car, and you couldn't. So we had to go walk on the other side first because the car happened to be here. We slept there. So we walked on the other side, got the rails, pushed it back, put the kayaks on, and then you push your thing. It's a little bit of a hill, but it's amazing. It's very much worth it. So for everyone who's also into trains, here you can kayak and trains.
Got it all in one trip?
Yeah. Oh yeah. This easily fits 2 kayaks and all the gear. Yep. Yeah, and then, this is coming to an end. We came to Juneau, we met our sailor friend from earlier again, and this turned a little bit into a clamping trip because it's really just, 3-4 days. There's even Haines, another town where you can get something. But we started really bad actually. So when you leave Juneau, has anyone been in Juneau for kayaking? And there's this wetland area. So you really need to start, I would say, just before high tide. Right? And we started just after high tide because where we had stored the kayaks, they didn't open until 8. And I think high tide was at 8 or so. So we started about 20 minutes too late. And the water will go out this way, right? And we are also going this way. So by the moment we are stranded, we know that every second we're not moving, the water is going away, right? And so this was about a mile pulling. So this is mud, like you'll really sink in. And that's some greenish algae stuff where once you're on top, your boat kind of slides, but your shoes also. So that's been this pushing against time, pushing and pulling against time, right? Where you're like, oh my God, we can't take a break because the water will go. So we made it, but that was really hard. But afterwards, the last 2 days were just glorious. Some fishers gave us lax, salmon, and the mountains are getting really big. It's really fascinating once you come into Lynn Canal, the end, how everything gets big. It's just grand. You got these snow-covered mountains around you. Lynn Canal is notorious for winds. In our case, they were mostly good in terms of southerly and just pushing us up. And then, the sailor friend Jeff that you saw earlier came to do the last day with us. And so we rolled into Skagway and, back on the ferry. So that's the quick tour through that. And then we'll go into some logistics. Talk about that. Before I jump into there, any questions that need to be answered now before we go into how do you do that and all the other things?
Do you ever see a grizzly bear?
Only at a park, at an observatory. Yeah, that worked out well, I think. Yeah.
How did you go in and get your food? You didn't carry the food. Where did you go?
The food. I'll talk about the food.
Oh.
Yeah.
How did you deal with the currents and all those tiny inside passages?
It's really complicated. I'll talk about that too, but I can say that's really complicated. That's like, yeah.
Why were you choosing to do such big days? I mean, was it a choice or was it just?
I think Chris has said that nicely. I just like endurance. Yeah. It just makes me happy to go. There's no, you don't have to. No, you really don't have to. I just like it.
Yes, you can.
Maybe.
Are you going to talk about immigration?
Oh, not much. Oh.
About how do you cross the border?
Oh, no, I don't. So I can say that now, yes, because let me go back to, it's hard to go back to the map. So it's actually easy, I think. But on my way, so I crossed the first border to Canada on the first day, basically after 15 miles. I have them somewhere. I have these headphones that are like bone conducting headphones. I don't know if you know them. So basically, I'm rolling into this first harbor where it's unmanned. There's no one. And theoretically, you're not supposed to step on land before you have immigrated. So I decided to not do that. So I'm sitting in my kayak. And I'm calling this number on my phone, so basically with my headphones and my kayak. They're like, okay, can you give me your passport number? And I'm like opening up, I'm in a kayak, I'm opening up everything. She's like, oh, okay, you're a resident in the US, can I have your green card number? So when you pull out your green card, you really don't want to lose your green card, right? And I'm like, I think I need to switch my position here. I'm like in my kayak with my passport and my green card out. And she's like, okay, you can go on land. So I went on land, sat on the dock and gave her that. So it wasn't too bad. And then going back from Canada to the US, you have to download an app. I think that's a new thing that might not have existed earlier. There's an app that you can download and you can punch everything in. I did this in Prince Rupert, so 3 days before the border because you won't have service. And then normally when you're an American citizen, everything goes through. When you have a green card, this app goes into an idle mode and says, we're going to call you back. Please stay tuned. And then you're sitting there in your hotel. And the app is like a spinning wheel. I'm like, OK, we'll see if they call. And then someone called me back. It's like, OK, I see your application for going into the US. And I'm like, yeah. You didn't put in your vessel. I'm like, what's a kayak? And he's like, oh, OK, well, you're set. So that was actually really easy. OK, cool. I'll talk about logistics and we'll do more questions, but please also ask in between here when we're getting there. This is the boat I kayaked in, the PH Valkyrie. if anyone has heard about this boat. It's not a very common boat. It might even be discontinued at that point. It is a plastic kayak, and I really chose a plastic kayak on purpose, because what I didn't want to do is, I didn't want to carry a lot of repair gear for worn-out boats. I really just wanted to drag up my boat on the beach and just, dump it and be done. I've heard a lot of horror stories of people like having to double carry their boats, and emptying before they get it out. So I didn't just want to deal with all of that, but I also wanted a fast boat. And I think this is probably one of the fastest sea kayaks you can get. It's really good in a downwind. It surfs when it's loaded. So if you're into that, highly recommend. It is lowish volume though. Yeah.
About 60 pounds?
60, yeah, it weighs 55 pounds. So not so much heavy, and not so heavy actually when you compare that to most fiberglass kayaks. Yeah. So the volume is a little bit limiting maybe. So I think the Kodiak, if you compare to that one, because that's one of the other big expedition boats I looked into, has 100 gallons volume-ish, right? So definitely much smaller. It's set for like a maximum load of 115. Who can do the math? That's like 250-ish pounds or something, out of which I'm 75, right? So really that only leaves 30 kilograms, 60-ish pounds for everything else, which includes water. And I remember at some point Gwen when I talked to Gwen in advance, it's like, well, a boat can also just be overloaded. So I'm pretty sure I have overloaded the boat. And there's these sidelines, obviously it's from the molding. I always felt these sidelines when they're out of the water, it's well loaded, but they were just also sometimes in the water. But I think it handled it pretty well. And I was able to put everything inside except for this little deck bag that you can see there. I've seen people before strapping on a bag on the back, which I personally don't like. What if you flip? And that all seems too complicated.
Where did you put the bear can?
What's that?
The bear can?
The bear, oh yes, thank you, I didn't mention that. This boat fits a bear container.
Only one?
Yeah, I want everyone to recognize that. No, 3. So that's actually very special, because this front, I don't know if they made it for that, because it's from the case. I don't think they made it for that, but this fits exactly one bear can. You can put it.
Full-size bear can?
No, half size, 450. So you can slide it in, turn it around, push it forward. Next one, and you can fit in 3 bear cans.
Nice.
Yeah, right? Exactly. So navigation, I did what maybe a lot of you might do very differently. I decided not to use any paper maps or printed maps while I'm on my kayak. Obviously, I had small maps or like overview maps for like at night for planning, but I decided to completely rely on electronics. I did have a compass, which is hard to see, but it's over here. But I had this Garmin GPS map, and I'll show this here. It's this GPS, which I had a mount, as you can see. So it was just basically nicely sitting on my cockpit, and I could just read it while kayaking. And I even developed a system that in every paddle stroke, I could see. Here's the page button, and so you can paddle and then come down, hit the page button, so it goes to the next page. Come down, hit the other page button. So you don't have to stop. So I really like that, and I'll talk later about how I did my planning. But basically, my whole route is on this computer, and I'm basically just following a route. It's like cycling when you have your GPS already set up. So I really like that. It worked beautifully. Can't complain. I did have my iPhone with me. The regular iPhone mini. I choose the iPhone mini because the battery is much smaller. So that means if you have to recharge it, you just need much less battery, right? And the display is smaller. And that worked out really well. And what I use that for, and I have it here in my PFD in a waterproof case, so I can actually, while kayaking, take it out and look at it. That also worked really well. And I used it pretty extensively for navionics, tides and currents, mostly currents actually, because what this thing doesn't do well is currents, right? It does tides okay. But also Call Topo, which is like a planning map where I have all my waypoints, all my campsites and everything. So I would pull out my phone when needed, but while kayaking, just use the Garmin. And then I brought a second phone because, electronics, what if they go down? So I would have been able to do everything on my second phone if all the electronics died. Didn't happen. Yeah.
How about batteries and charging?
Oh no, wait, later, sorry. I wanted to say that very quick. For the Garmin GPS, what I really like mostly is, for one, really the navigation. This is just a little demo here in the bay. I'm really following this purple line, right? Which is, when you're in fog, that's pretty helpful when you know where you want to go, right? And you can do this with maps, and it's probably good to know how to use maps, but I don't know, I like that. I also like this speed picture because I like to go fast and I like to have my rhythm and everything. It even shows you, well, it will show you the distance to the destination. It shows you when you're expected to be somewhere. I kind of like that, and I think a lot of people will be stressed out about that, but I enjoy that. But then what's really important actually is the quick tidal info. Again, I figured out exactly I think there was left-hand downward stroke when I could hit the thing 3 times and then I was at the tides, right? Which is, I have more precise tides on Navionics, but sometimes you just need a quick insight, can I land here at all, or is it a really bad timing? So I found that really helpful. And then for mapping, what I did, this is what I had on my phone. Caltopy is one of the tools. I literally mapped the whole route with all the campsites. Like I'll talk about this later a little bit more, but I spent quite some time mapping everything out. And then I had camps, possible ones. The red ones are those that I thought I would camp at. The green ones are just backup options. And then I also marked hazards. And then I put some extra text to the hazards, like all in preparation, right? So then when I would be there the morning before, I could just look at my phone, be like, what's coming up today? So full on electronics. And that's why we need batteries, exactly. So I had 4 of these little battery packs, something that, this is the smallest one that you see on top, but basically 4 battery packs. And the small one I would keep in my day hatch, just in my bail bag, right? If I had to emergency exit, I wanted my electronics to work, just in case. Basically, I tested my daily needs. I was about at 7,000 milliamp hours that I needed for the Garmin GPS half charge. It would usually use half of that, the InReach half charge. iPhone usually full charge because I took pictures. VHF a little bit, and headlamp a little bit. And so that was usually pretty well working for 10 days. So I never ran out, actually. And then this idea I got from Jonathan, I think, here on the Haida presentation with this little bit of a solar panel. Honestly, I never really used that much. And if you're kayaking many hours a day, it's kind of hard to charge. So I like to not rely on solar panels. Also, this is so small. The whole pack is like this, right? So you could easily throw in 2 more, and that's not going to overload your kayak. So seemed pretty simple. Well, I'm not sure. This is also from another, weather. We all have to deal with weather, and it's clear that you also really want to listen to your VHF. They have the weather channel. I kind of still have the sound in my ear, 3 feet waves, 4 feet waves, the way they say that. There were days and so Matt was giving me daily weather forecasts, and really extensively. You can see that here. He was like writing everything up, and what was great is that I would also get weather for 3 days in advance. So because I didn't have a single weather day, so I did not kayak one single day just because of weather. But what I did often is just go super early, or push hard, or get off the water early. So it was great for me to have a 3-day forecast regularly to know what's coming, where I should push more. But then it was really interesting how off windy and all the forecasts were sometimes in very local areas. So listening to your VHF in some places can be really helpful.
So Katrin?
Yeah.
So he's saying that the moon is near full, you might have to paddle at night, but you were here in
You all know Matt, right?
Right?
Yeah.
Right near the
So there's no night.
solstice.
Well,
That's what I was going to ask. How much of a night did you actually have?
Remember this one picture earlier when I talked about the guy with the underwear? So that was 3 or 3:30, I think, when I took that picture. Right, and so by 11 there was still sun mostly. So there was a little bit of few hours of night.
Yeah. Did you have to do something to sleep with?
No, you're so tired after that.
Paddling 26 miles.
No, yes.
So on the electronics, did you have some kind of a emergency beacon, like a spot? Or
Yes, I have a slide for that.
Oh, okay.
Yep. Cool.
How are you getting the weather forecast, the texting? Is that on the InReach or something?
Yes, I have an InReach, and again, I show that also later. Yep. Mm-hmm. So it was great to have Matt send me, I think, send me these things in advance, like basically the night before, so I would know, when to get up and all these things. And then David, who's here, every now and then, because he's in an office and it's easy for him to respond to messages. Every now and then I was like, David, I really have no visibility. Can you check out Windy right now? And do you see what's happening? And so there were a few cases where I got like super on-demand forecast, which, again, you could have also just waited it out, but I just wanted to go.
A question about the weather. You said the VHF, you would, what range, or how many miles is that weather?
How many miles? What do you mean?
Yeah, like.
Oh, what the range is?
It's 40 miles, so it's kind of useless. What about there? How is it?
It worked. I feel down out in Campania. It didn't really work too well, but otherwise, it worked pretty well. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
They have offshore they have beacons on the coast that repeat repeaters. That repeat the.
No, I'm saying that the range forecast, usually they are like 9 miles, 15 miles.
Oh, what that range?
40 miles, so which one is?
I mean, they're reading the whole thing, right? And when you're in Canada, they're reading it English and then French. And so it takes quite a while until you're through one circle. Yeah. You just listen to, you have it in the background, and you just listen to it. So someone asked about currents earlier, right? So we all know what ebb and flood means, so water going to the ocean and back. But it's quite a mess in BC. Because when you think of British Columbia, at some point, the northeast, it's not clear which direction ebb would take. And also, just because, let's say, one stream is here, one channel and the other channel is here, doesn't mean that they have the same direction. Because there could be like a turnaround here and something there. And so, yeah, that's quite complicated. And some of them are too strong to ignore it. This is out in Campania is here. Yeah, so this is Campania. There's also some really strange stuff going on. It's like pushing really in and also pushing in from here, and then you have some. The point is, like, while you can look it up and try to optimize for it, I mean, at some point it also just won't work, right? Like you have to also deal with like suboptimal conditions. Like if you want to optimize for everything, the tides, the currents, the weather, and also you don't want to kayak. You don't want to come out on low tide because then you have to schlep your kayak down. So then you'll never kayak, right? So I think you have to just go with some things. But for anyone who's going, what's really great is to look into the Canadian sailing directions. I learned about them when I was on the water, which is maybe not the time you should, but they have all these information about every channel. And for Daniel, who was looking into the Inside Passage, really look into the Canadian sailing directions earlier. They have information on every stream. There was one that I ran into some really crazy riptides, which I could have avoided had I read this thing before. So they're really.
Is it a printed resource or online? Or?
Yeah, I had it on my phone, but actually, you can download it. But there were a few places where you can't ignore the currents. You really have to watch them. And I'm going to play this video now. So this is I think this is the Dent Rapids up here. You have to go when it's flat, completely slack. And if not, you get whirlpools and stuff that apparently have capsized small cruise ships.
Oh, nice. So you avoided this.
Or not.
I did not feel like getting into this, this foamy thing. No. There are longer videos. You should actually watch some of the videos. It's really hilarious. But then when you get to it while it's slack, there's like nothing. It's a lake, right? So usually what you do, and there's another one. So there's two. There's this one, or actually this is the Chakotay Rapids, and then this one. In each you have to go in slack, but there's a time when you manage to be here 7 minutes before slack and here like whatever, you can make this in one push. And I wanted to do this in one push because otherwise you're waiting here, but you're potentially waiting here for a night, right? Because otherwise you have the flood coming in or something. But so how do you know when exactly you're going? Because you have to go really exactly. So there's all these tables. And this is, have you heard of a secondary station? Does anyone know so for currents, there are readout stations where they're actually reading out. And Gillard Passage is one of the stations where they're reading out. And I think they're just literally measuring, I'm assuming, right? And so then you have everything you want to know, like, how fast it's flooding. It's pretty, 12.5 knots, pretty fast, right? Yeah. And so then, but then there's all these other little channels where we said earlier, it's not quite predictable when again, earlier or later, or which direction even. So they have all these like secondary stations where you have deltas, right? So for example, and for me what mattered are Jakarta and Dent. So basically what that says is you go 25 minutes on top of whatever you have for your main station, right? So you would look up Gillard, sorry, that's over here. You would look up Gillard, when does it turn? Maybe here at 1543, and then you're going plus 25. You know, that's for, what is that? Turning to flat. I want a turning to ebb, so plus 5, you know, and then Dent Rapids, it's minus 25. Cool. So you do that, and then your book says, well, and you have to start 5 minutes before whatever it starts. So you're sitting there in your boat and you do like, you know, a little timing math on like the screen. This is 5 pages of PDF, right, where you're like sliding through. And I found out 15:23, 3:23, that's my time to go. So I was hanging out on this spot, there's like a little pier. I was like, okay, it's 3:23, I'll go. We'll see if I did the math right. Also, it's another UTC minus 8 or something. So anyways, all these things were like, I'm not quite sure if I screwed it up, right? And so you're like paddling into that, and every little whirly that you see is like, oh my God, is this the end? And then I came here, and I thought it's done. And I was like relaxing, happy, everything worked out. And then I see these whirlpools forming all of a sudden everywhere, like tiny ones, right? And I'm like, oh shit, I'm not quite done yet. So another mile, and everything worked out beautifully. But there are a few of those. So those you really don't want to screw up. And I learned this literally the day before because I had posted that on Facebook that I'm going into this. And someone I met was like, oh, Kat, you know that you can't confuse, especially here, the tide, high tide, with when the current, when slack is. It's different. And also there's all these books and all these PDFs. I'm like, oh, okay, I'm going to look into that. So we have this. Okay, next important question. How do you know if your campsite's going to stay dry? Yeah, right. So the Inside Passage has this massive tidal ranges of up to 22 feet. So 22 feet is like, what is that? The top of this building to the water, maybe? So quite high, right? The Bay Area, in king tides, we have 7 to 10, usually 5 to 8. So do you think this is 22 feet? I mean, the vertical? And also, how do you know? You know, in the best scenario, in terms of what you have to do, you land somewhere. You land here-ish at 6 p.m., and then at 8 p.m. you have a high tide. You don't go to bed at 8, right? So you're hanging out there, you see what the high tide does, and then at 8:20 you pitch your tent. Because you know the next time it's going to come around, it's in 12 hours. And by, you know, that time I'm long gone. That's great, because also then what that means, when you want to leave somewhere here, the water is up. So you save not only dragging up, but you save dragging down. I mean, but again, this doesn't always work out, right? So sometimes you land here. Oh my God, this is terrible. Because then you're like, so is that 22 feet? Or is that maybe more or less? Or where should I even camp, right? So what you can do is, you can set an alarm and then react at night, you know, depending on what happens. Or you can also just carry it even further, just assuming. And when you carry it into the forest, you're usually safe. When you're carrying it, that's for you particularly, when you're carrying it on grass, that doesn't mean much, especially not on spring tides, because there is saltwater grass. So just the fact that there's grass doesn't mean it's going to stay dry. You know, and you might look into all of that. Something I had not appreciated enough before, like how the phases change it so much, right? And not only obviously the magnitude, but also when you look at the little ones, like doing full moon, or new moon, the tides are similar high, but in between at neap tides, you have these little ones. You have a little one and then a big one. And I had moments where I misjudged the little ones. I'm like, oh, we're at high tide, so I know what's going to happen after. But no, the next one is just higher. So that was one of the interesting nights, you know, one of these with like a little one and a higher one. So I came here and I really did not want to go into this forest because it was nasty and dark, and also my 4th day, and I really just didn't feel going into the forest. I was like, I mean, this must be okay. That's 15 feet. Like predicted 15 feet, that must be okay. But I did set my alarm. I think high tide was supposed to be at midnight or something, so I set it to 11. And so I saw this. But I still didn't want to go into the forest. Totally not. So I was like, we're an hour away from high tide, and you know how it flattens out on top. So I was like, I think it's gonna work out. And it came to about here, right? But I had my bags packed, and I was like, oh, what am I gonna do? It worked out. But I try to avoid that in the future. Those are my favorite sort of campsites, but granted, I got lucky, especially this one here. If that had come up, that would have been really not great, but I got lucky sometimes. And then sometimes I just really played it safe. Sometimes in really nice spots, there were these beautiful forests with like green beds, and you really want to sleep in there. And then there's a few ugly, you haven't seen that. There's this few ugly forests where you literally have to like hack in a little campsite. That didn't happen too much, honestly. Sometimes it did, and sometimes you just camp where you're not supposed to camp because it's pretty. And then this was like at 9 p.m. and just totally didn't work out.
Okay. Does it work like on your cell phone? You can check the elevation. Have you ever tried it? Is it reliable? Because
interesting. No, I did not try that.
You see the elevation, and just you walk up and you see the elevation and you see the differential.
The thing is just, yes, I like this idea, but for example here, if I had known beforehand that the tide would stop here, I would still camp there, right? So you really have to be precise because it's clear there's not going to be 7 feet of like above. It's more like it's maybe 2 feet more. And I'm not sure if it's precise enough for that. Yeah. So that happens. Cool. A lot of people ask me, what did I eat? So I'm going into that a little bit more. I think most importantly, there is no restocking. Like unless you're fishing, there really isn't any restocking between towns. So I estimated my calorie needs, and for that I wore a Fitbit for 2 weeks, and while I was exercising. I was kind of surprised that even on training days, I would only get to 3,800 calories a day, which sounds kind of low, especially on a work day I was getting to 2,500. So it's kind of surprising that 8 hours of kayaking only make for that more. So maybe it's not quite precise, but I knew it's not going to be 7,000, so that's probably helpful. And then, you want to eat your food, right? You don't want to be stuck with something you don't want to eat or you can't digest it. Some people do the Inside Passage mailing themselves food. I think it's pretty common because these towns have all mail offices. I like simple logistics, so I decided not to do that. It's much cheaper. You don't have to pay customs. You also don't have to stick to the opening hours of a post office because what if you get there at 6 and they're closed and it's Saturday, they're not open on Sunday, right? And then you have to take a rest day. Oh my God, extra rest day. So I just decided to buy whatever I could get, which mostly worked. The selection of freeze-dried meals is pretty limited sometimes. But I would say overall, there's way more food than you could imagine in general. I don't know if you agree, but I think it's pretty easy to restock from that perspective. And so what did I eat? Freeze-dried meals, if I could get them. I ended up eating fettuccine Alfredo chicken basically for 50 days. And sometimes it was slightly named differently, but it's been pasta and cream sauce and chicken. That just works for me, right? That's perfect. And they never have enough calories because they're rated for 800 calories, and that just doesn't, you want to get to 3,500. That was my goal. So olive oil is pretty good. So I usually put another 200 calories of olive oil on top of that. And then I ate a lot of chocolate because it's really easy to carry. I really like it. And it's this easy, cheap 500 calories just right in there. I did like my coffee. That's not so necessary on the calorie side. But coffee goes really well with coconut milk powder, which A, tastes really good, and B, every spoon has 60 calories, right? At some point you become a calorie counter. So you're like, okay. And it goes well into everything. It tastes well on my fettuccine chicken. I could put it on my chocolate. I could put it in my coffee. So it's just easy to feed yourself another 60 calories. And then, nuts and some oats. And my constraint was it had all my food, and obviously toiletries had to go into 3 of these bear canisters. And someone asked earlier, the big ones, those are the 450, right? So the big ones are like this, and these ones are kind of like this big. So everything for 10 days. And I was planning on always carrying 10 days of food. Everything had to go in there. What I would probably do different, because I unpacked these freeze-dried meals, they take up a lot of space. So I unpacked and put them into Ziploc bags. I think in the future I would not put them in the bear canisters because I think they're so well packed and they don't smell. So I think it's okay to not have them inside. I decided not to hang my food because I don't like this complicated throw a rope and then have to pull it up. So this being in bear canisters, at night I would just literally walk my stuff somewhere to the side and just dumped it into the bushes.
Were you cooking where you were camping, or did you cook somewhere else?
I mean, I cooked that much. I cooked freeze
your
food.
site, for bears and animals. To keep the cooking away from where you're sleeping.
I'll show a picture on how that works. Yeah, definitely. I'm going to talk about safety first. So obviously it's a solo trip, right? So you're making yourself vulnerable. I think preventing injuries is one of the most important things, obviously. Sounds so simple and clear, but it is actually super important. And that means, I think, plan conservatively. And I think you need to know yourself for that, right? Like if I tell you what I did, that might be boring for some, and for others it would be just crazy, right? So really know yourself what that means to you. And also walk with real shoes. On land, I think the most common and likely injury is you slip on something because you're wearing sandals. Like I had tennis shoes or like sneakers for other things. There's lots of barnacles everywhere, so it's so easy to cut your toe, and then if that gets infected, right? So like, I think walking with proper shoes is a good idea. Yeah, and in general, it's a solo trip, or if it's a solo trip, your margin is small, right? What I did for safety, and I'm going to show these tools now, and you're welcome to check them out later. This is the InReach in Mini. Who has not seen that? Cool. Yeah, you should look at that later. I bought it originally for cycling because it's so small. There's actually not a reason not to bring that, right? It fits in your cycling jacket, and I always have it with me. I put it on tracking mode so that friends can actually see permanently where I am. And then part of my protocol with friends was that they knew exactly where I've been planning to go, and I would send them a message at the beginning or at the end, like, I'm done, I'm here, everything okay. And then radio, I'm not showing you. I had an E-flare. I really like this, actually. Has anyone seen that before? So what usually people bring are these flares. They're toxic. You should only have them for 40 months or something, or they have like a short lifespan, and so then they need special disposal. But there's E-flares. So this thing is sending an SOS signal, and it can do this apparently for 60 hours, much longer than any E-flare, right? I thought that's pretty cool. So I had an E-flare.
Where do you keep that?
What's that?
Where did you keep that?
Where did I buy that? In my so I had a bail bag on, this little bag that I had on top of my kayak. I had a bail bag with this. Also, this is a PLB. The InReach has an emergency button, and that's fine. And a PLB, personal locator beacon, it can do nothing more than send out an emergency signal. And they're rated for long battery lifetimes. So this is rated for 5 years, and it's done now. All you can do is press an emergency button. It gets put on a different type of satellites. So the InReach goes on, I forget what, this goes on SASAT, I believe. And apparently these satellites are stronger. So if you're in a valley or something, you're more likely to, and it's critical, you're more likely to catch a satellite with this. And then this will, get dispatched, and you'll just sit there and wait, and hopefully someone's coming. So it's kind of not nice to only rely on that, especially for injuries where you could, ask someone for help. But I think it's a good backup to have. And and that was also in my bail bag. Yeah, what else? PLB, yeah. And then, I think I had a pretty solid first aid kit. I also took a wilderness first aid course for 2 days where, they talk you through. You can read the list. I'm happy to share my first aid kit list later. But basically what I did, I talked my doctor into giving me this. So basically the plan was to be able to, put myself into if I were injured, put myself into a position where I could hang out for 16 hours, because while it is remote, with a motorboat, as we have these today, you can actually get there. And with the tracking on your GPS, on your InReach, people can actually find you, right? So friends at home who were watching me had my exact plans where I wanted to go, and they would see where I am, and there were descriptions of, like, if anything happens, give this package to authorities, and then they can find me, they can identify me, and blah, blah, blah. Bears, finally, yes. So pretty much everything is on brown and grizzly bear territory. And yeah, I'm really afraid of bears. And I know why, because when I went to Glacier Bay first, there were just so many bears all the time. We saw like 3 grizzly bears. And I thought I went there with a friend, and I was like, okay, I'm doing a solo trip and I'll have to deal with this every night by myself. That's just scary. So I was extremely cautious, and I followed this bear triangle. Who hasn't seen the bear triangle, or who's not aware of that? So the idea is that your sleeping area, your kitchen area, and your food cache are far apart, right? So because you really don't want to attract a bear to you. You can't always do a triangle, especially when you're on a beach, so you just stretch it out. But the point is, no food or drink ever in your tent, right? Like, not like a little Snickers bar at night, as nice as it is. You know, just never any food in your tent, and also no toothbrush and a toothpaste and, you know, sunscreen and all these things. I keep all my food always in the bear walls, and as I said earlier, I would just take the IKEA bag with the bear walls, just walk them to the side and throw them in the bushes. Really easy. I cooked pretty minimally, right? Like all I did is I heated up water and that's it, which I think reduces smells massively. And you know, everyone's like, oh, did you do fishing? That's so cool. And I'm like, no, because fishing has like, what if I get some stains on my shirt? And then I smell. You know, and then ideally you do all your washing and restroom activities below the high tide line. And that's really your flush, right? I mean, away from your tent, but also just below the high tide mark. And the tide will just take it away. And then, yeah, every step on land, you have bear spray with you. And I put the bear spray on like a little string so I could just hang it on my shoulder so it's not inconvenient. It had a little bell, so every time I moved, it would make some sound. It's kind of annoying, but it works. And then you just speak to this imaginary Mr. Bear, right? I just started talking, hey, Mr. Bear, how's it going? What's going on today? Because when you walk to your campsite, the most dangerous thing is that you separate a mom from their cub. So they need to know you're there. And, you know, I mean, it worked. I didn't see a bear outside of once in an observatory, but except for that not. I saw plenty evidence, so they were definitely there. Yeah. What else do we have? Route planning. How are we on time? A little bit over? I'll do 10 more minutes? Cool. I like planning. I really like planning. And for me, that's part of the whole story. So, you know, people have written books about that. That's great. So I read them. I researched the route. I spent about 2 months, you know, like mapping everything. So I mapped 1,200 miles. I put in every campsite that I could find evidence on. And there's resources that you can take. I got some checkpoints from other people, so I copied that in. I marked other POIs, I marked hazards, and then I even thought of like, where would I be camping? So I made this huge spreadsheet where for every day I had like an idea where I could be sleeping and how many miles I would be, just to get a sense for what's realistic, how long will I need on the longest stretch, what does it mean for food, how many days will I be out, and all these things. And interestingly, I think I used 70% of my campsites that I had planned beforehand. So it worked out pretty well.
So you didn't do that 8 hours a day?
What's that?
You weren't doing the planning 8 hours a day?
No, I mean, for 2 months I spent many hours every day. But yeah, it's just been a hobby for that time.
Did you use tides and currents to sort of estimate how long you'd be?
Did I use what?
Tides and currents to help you plan how far you would go each day.
Do you mean to like get a sense for how fast I could go?
Yeah.
No, and I would say I know my speed just from local kayaking, so I know what pace I can sustain, you know, and then you can always have a bad day or like a particularly good day, but I knew that, yeah. So I didn't bank on like, oh, this is a day where I can potentially go with the tide and run 8 miles per hour. No. Oh yeah, gear preparation. Obviously it's about self-reliance, you know, you gotta have everything you need. Test your gear. This tent did not make the cut. So what I did is I tested the tent on a rainy day in Dolores Park, just sitting in the park and just having breakfast. I have resealed everything and I thought like maybe it can make it. And it was a beautifully rainy day. And you know, when the rain comes inside, it's just a moment of like, this is not going. So, but the point is more like, don't bring new gear where you're like, I think this works great, right? And then it doesn't, or it doesn't fit you, or you know, all these things. You forgot the straps or something. Like test your gear. It's so obvious, but I've heard people who are like, oh, too bummer, I didn't test my tent. You know, and then for your gear, you want to be able to fit that all, right? And for me, what I said earlier, I'm quick in planning. I can do 45 minutes out of bed to water, but I really know where everything goes. Like every bag has its place. Every item in the bag has its place. It's good to not have too large. I mean, you probably know that if you've done camping. If you have these large 20, 30 liter dry bags, they don't fit in, right? And if they fit, they like leave these empty spaces. So smaller is much better. Like I like the 10 liter bags. And then I like that I could carry everything in 2 IKEA bags, right? Like in a day where I had to carry my stuff, load it up, put it on your shoulders, walk it up, and then pull up the kayak. So pretty easy, yeah.
Did you have any issues getting water to drink?
Yes, actually yes. I ended up carrying 20 liters of water almost constantly. because on day 2 I ran out of water and it was pretty warm, so many streams weren't going, and I slept on islands for bear safety. So oftentimes I just didn't find water. Yeah.
A water filter, like they do, like river.
Second, please.
Sometimes the water filter, like for the river.
She's asking, did you have a water filter?
Oh yes, I had a water filter. Yes, definitely. Yes. I don't think you want.
There was a drought last year up there, and lots of streams that we have seen running before were not running.
Yeah, and it was so warm. Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. You know, and that might not seem like a lot, but it's a lot of stuff. It's like, yeah, one of the hotels, and then, you know, whenever you get to a hotel, everything gets unpacked, and you're like, oh, this does all fit. Okay. Cool. And you know, as I said, I'm a planner, so I plan for every item, A, which item I have, and B, where it goes. Right. So if anyone wants this sheet, happy to share. Physical preparation. I think general fitness helps, right? Because besides the fact that you're kayaking, sometimes you're schlepping your boat and you're doing all the things, right? So for me, it's biking just because I like that anyways, and then I kayak quite a bit. But I think what's important is also to train in and simulate a realistic scenario. And so when I bought my kayak, luckily I got that in March, so I had quite some time to train on that. My friend Zach made this wonderful gift to me. He's like, here are 60 pounds of sandbags. You will need them. So I kayaked with 60 pounds of sandbags for 2 months in preparation. And a kayak, you know, handles very differently when it's full. It's not even the moving speed, it's the acceleration that's massively slowed down. I feel once you're moving, you're actually fine. You know, I think it's valuable to learn rolling with a loaded boat. It works actually pretty well, but you know, it's still a little bit different. So all these things. I put in a bunch of really long distance paddles. And then my training schedule was 5 days on, 2 days off. So basically I would kayak for 2 months, I would kayak 5 days every day. And again, you don't have to do that. I just didn't, you know, I wanted these distances, etc. But I think that just know what you can do to your body, because overuse injuries are common. And you know, the Swedish guy I kayaked with, he lost one of his buddies because he had a shoulder injury. He just had an overuse injury, which, you know, so just know what you can do to your body without causing that. And then honestly, eat some extra beforehand. That's the nice part of preparation, because I definitely lost some. It was hard to bring enough, even though I calculated the calories. Okay, we're getting close to the end. Mental. Yeah, obviously build your core skills, but also confidence in them, right? I think, for example, if you can't roll or you cannot roll well and you have doubts, I think that's very limiting, because then you don't dare to go some things. But if you know I can do this, this is what I can do, I think that's very valuable in general. And then really talk to others who've done something similar. And I think the kayaking community is amazing in terms of how willing everyone is to share. I literally started conversations with people on Facebook. I'm like, hey, I saw somewhere that you had done that. Can we meet? And people are like, sure, let's do a Zoom meeting. So many people shared maps, stories, gear lists very, very freely with me. So highly recommend just to reach out to people and do that. What I like to do is imagine the worst case scenario, right? Like what if, you know, whatever that means to you, if having only, I don't know, chocolate to eat is worst case scenario, then you need to think about that. But you know, how does it look and how will you deal with that? At least that helped me from a mental situation to think about that. And then my friend told me the first 2 weeks are the hardest when most people quit. I almost quit on day 2 because it was like this, which maybe doesn't look so much bad, but it was so boring. I was like constantly going against everything. Like in this case, I don't know what happened to the tides, but I just didn't get it right. It was so warm. I literally pulled over here and stripped off everything and kayaked in a t-shirt. It was incredibly hot. And I was like, I'm gonna do this for 50 days. This is terrible. But then luckily it wasn't. But yeah, there are moments that are maybe not quite as great. And then what was really great for me is have, you know, something you can draw comfort from. And for me, I really like eating chocolate. That's not a secret at this point. And I could drink coffee literally any day, any hour of the day, and you know, I can perfectly sleep after. But like the sunset and just shoving in another bar of chocolate and drinking coffee, it was just wonderful for me. And I don't think I've ever had so little food cravings in my life than on this trip. So maybe it's a chocolate. I also have some interesting chocolate stats. I ate 6.6 kilograms of chocolate. Every mile is powered by 28 kilos of calories of chocolate. Cool. Okay. With that, this trip was definitely supported by a lot of people. David's here, Ben's here. I asked a lot of questions to a lot of you here. So thanks for that. You can either scan this or I have a blog post with like some more info, and you can copy this. I can also leave that open later if people want to check this out. Yes?
What was the food? You had the order, but you said you went to town. But how did you left the stuff, and then how far did you walk to town?
So many towns are set up for sailors who are coming through. So they have these yacht clubs, like here. And then in some, I think in Prince Rupert, they even had racks, and you can pay them $20 or something, and they keep your kayak. In others, you had to shove it somewhere. And they were usually within, I don't know, half a mile or less walking. Okay. So it's pretty convenient. And it helps if you can carry your stuff easily, so you don't have to walk 20 times. Yeah. I want to do one more slide, and then I'll take more questions. I want to say that, so I'm a member of BAS, but I'm also a member of Kayaks Unlimited, which is, a little club in San Francisco, if you know. And we do have containers there where we keep boats, private and club boats, and we do community paddles. And in a fire in August, everything burned out, literally. So 20 private, but also club kayaks literally melted into pieces, balls of plastic. My kayak included, David's kayak included, everyone's kayak. We got a lot of support from the Port of San Francisco and Pasha, Hawaii, who donated new containers to us. So this is all set up, and we're now, restocking our fleet. If anyone needs to get rid of a few single sea kayaks that are beginner friendly and might want to sell them to us for cheap, then you should reach out to us for stocking. Cool. Okay. With this, I'm done here. I'm going back to the slide, and if there are more questions, I can take them now. Everyone. All right.
I think you're going to have to teach the expedition section of the skills clinic.
Oh, yeah. I would love to. Yes, please.
Would you do it again?
Yes, but not the same, because I don't like to do things twice. But no, definitely, it's a wonderful trip. Yes.
If you only had 2 weeks or 200 miles, what section would you?
I would definitely do the section between. I would take a ferry to Prince Rupert, and I would backtrack to Port Hardy. That might be a little bit long for 2 weeks. And if that's the case, I would go from Prince Rupert to Shearwater. So, but generally, that section between Prince Rupert and Port Hardy is by far the best.
So prevailing winds were north or south? But they were south.
What runs? I'm going to show the map here so we see that.
Prevailing winds.
No, there are no prevailing winds. Not really. Oh, yeah. Yeah, no, I think you can do it any direction. So quickly, I would do about this section and here. And if you do have the skills to go slightly outside.
Bella is in the middle there somewhere, so you could cut that in half.
Exactly.
And that would make it a shorter trip.
And if I would do the shorter version, I think this is by far the best part. Prince Rupert to Bella Shearwater. This one is also great. This is more exposed, but yeah, both are wonderful.
Canadian folks do that.
Yeah.
Bella. Well, not a lot, but
yeah. No, it's wonderful. It's yeah. Mm-hmm.
So besides the bear turds and the wolf prints, what did you see for wildlife?
Yeah, I saw. One of the things I would do different is bring a better camera. I saw so many bald eagles. I saw on one island I think I counted 30, and I'm like, that's ridiculous. I stopped counting. I saw lots of otters, very, very cute. They like to lounge in the kelp, and they hug their babies in a very cute way. And I remember when I crossed Cape Caution, and there's some tension when you're crossing Cape Caution. And I remember going by here, being super attentive to everything. And then I look over, and there's this otter chilling in the water, watching me doing this. What else did I see? I saw orcas once. I saw plenty of whales. I have no pictures of all of that. bear once, 2 bears once in an observatory. Yeah, minks, I think. It's like this little tiny weasel sort of things. Yeah, they're everywhere. Yeah.
Did you see any moose?
I didn't see a wolf. I saw the prints. Moose. No, I didn't see moose. No. No, I think there's deer. On these islands outside, there's deer. Yeah. Yeah.
Did you plan to take that middle inside passage route? Or
Not originally. Oh, very originally, I was just like, I didn't think I can do that. And then when I was in Port Hardy, and everything had gone so well until then, and in Port Hardy, the hotel I stayed in happened to have this book. I'm like, oh, I might just replan everything. So I sat there for a day and replanned it. Yeah.
So do you do this solo because nobody can keep up with you?
I did this solo because I think I like solo also. It was also really nice to have someone at the end, so it was an interesting mix. But yeah, I wanted to do exactly the speed that I wanted to do because for me that is fun. It's like how you find your flow. And if you go faster or slower, even if it's just a little bit, it's not your flow. And I just wanted to experience that for like a long stretch of time.
Okay, we probably need to wind things up a little bit so we
Alrighty.
can get out in time.
Yeah? What was it?
Where's your next adventure?
My next adventure? Well, I would like to do, so my next one that goes to biking and kayaking. I want to continue the outside of Vancouver Island, and I want to kayak this and cycle back. It's not planned in a year yet. I don't think I have time this year, so we'll see. Cool. Alrighty. Thanks, everyone. And if anyone wants to check out some of the electronics, they're here, and also some books.